Hi, everyone. Welcome back. This is our final session of the day and the Community and Tribal Leaders Panel. And I just really want to thank everyone who's learning to navigate the technology. I have to admit, I was a little bit frustrated and figuring it out myself, but I keep saying we keep learning more and more, and we just get better with the tools at our disposal. And I really do appreciate our production team because this is new technology to me, and I'm really impressed that we're able to do these breakouts so that we really can feel like we can have those smaller group discussions. So let's go back to our final session. This is really, I've been really looking forward to this, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to speak and moderate this next panel with four esteemed guests. Please, if you're not familiar with them, check out their bios in the attendee packet. I'd like to first introduce Keita Price, the Hood Planter. Keita Price, the Hood Planter. Chairman Val Lopez with the Amamutsan Tribal Band. Canyon Coyote Woman Sayers Roots. She's with the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone. And Izzy Martin from the Sierra Fund. So we're going to welcome everybody situated and got all your mics on, and I think we've all done a good sound check. We're going to have a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask an opening question, and when I'm at, I'd like to have each of you speak to it with a few minutes. And the question is, can each of you share an outreach engagement experience that you've had with a public agency or a process where you anticipated, the process itself or the experience would be negative, but it turned out to have some positive outcomes, or even vice versa, where you may have had a positive anticipation and it may have turned in the other direction. But that'll be the first question, and I'm going to ask our production team to type it into the chat so that you could see that question. But I'd like to first recognize, Honorable Chairman Val Lopez. Thank you for being here and taking time out of your busy day. Canyon and Izzy and Keita, thank you so much. And Chairman, if we're ready, can we start with that question?
I'll be happy to. Thank you very much, Anasita. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. So you want to share an outreach or engagement experience that we thought was going to be negative, but it turned out to have some positive outcomes. We have some of those examples. In 2007, we got a invitation to go to State Park's land north of Santa Cruz, and to participate in an archaeological field school that was happening there with UC Berkeley. And it was a site that was a first contact site with the Waswas ancestors, the people of that land. And at first I said, no way, no, we would never do that. Why would we ever want to do that? Our tribal thinking at that time was that state parks and a lot of the other state agencies that own land and stuff like that, they just want to dig up our ancestors and send them to a museum or put them on a fireplace mantle somewhere, and that's it. And disturbing our ancestors is the greatest violation of our spiritual belief that there is. And so we said no, and that was it. We thought that was going to be our final answer. But then we had a student from our tribe who was going to participate in that field school, and he came and talked to us, and he said that they're going to do something new. They're going to do a really low impact excavations where they just take out a approximately 1 foot by 1 foot test unit, and they're only going to take out 4 or 5 of those. And then before they do that, they would do underground penetrating radar and look for anomalies that would indicate that. And State Parks was very encouraging here too, and said that our tribe could have yes/no authority on whether that pit, whether that test pit would be would be worked or not. And so with that, we said yes. But as a result of that, we developed very good relationships with UC Berkeley, and there was other institutions there as well, Stanford and UC Santa Cruz as examples. And then with state parks, we started developing a really good, strong relationship with state parks and talking to them almost on a daily basis and working with them. And we probably did that for 6-7 years. And today we recognize how important and valuable that archaeology work is. And we also realize how important those relationships are with landholdings. We are a federally unrecognized tribe. We own no land. And so the only, so we have to depend on relationships for us to get access to our land. Today, we have many MOUs with Bureau of Land Management, national parks, state parks, many open space trusts and land trusts. We have access to over 140,000 acres within our tribal territory, and we depend on those relationships. A couple things that are important here is that our tribe must have decision-making authority on a lot of, on how the cultural resources studies are going to go. And we have yes/no authority on whether a project goes forward or not. And the other thing is we tell people right up front, our partners and our friends only get one opportunity with us. If they blow it just one time, we're done with them. We'll walk away. In my lifetime, we'll never work with them again. So that's another important part of relationships. And I'll stop there, Anacita. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman. Appreciate that. Kita, did you get the question? And I'd like to hear from you about sharing an engagement experience that you've had where you could have anticipated to be negative, but you had a different outcome, or the vice versa, where you were brought into a position where you expected good outcomes and then it may have turned something negative.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the vice versa. We try to not go into bad situations if we think it's gonna be bad, too bad, or try not to have that thinking because your thoughts become reality. So, in that sense, vice versa, we try to go into government contracts with good faith. In case folks don't know, again, I'm Kita Price, the Hood Planner, but I'm also with the East Oakland Collective. So we do a lot of community engagement for racial and economic justice, and I do a lot of neighborhood and transportation planning. So I'm a direct liaison between the community and the city of Oakland transportation department, and sometimes strategic planning. And so through some of our past and current projects, as we have good faith in going into these projects now that the city have these departments and more language of equity, trying to put it to the test and see what implementation and the action behind that look like. And so the city just continued to fall short to us, even with all of the rhetoric of equity and inclusion. And so we have a process that we went through called the East Oakland Neighborhood Initiative, also known as EONI. And so the East Oakland Collective and about 12 other groups partner with the City of Oakland's planning department to do an equitable climate community and neighborhood driven plan that was funded by the state, the Transformative Climate Communities grant. And so we went through a year-long planning process, together, and we really led this process and how we wanted to engage communities. And so we worked very closely with a planner. And so going into the project, we expected to work with although still white male, like the typical planners are in the department, this guy was still more kind of cool and not necessarily progressive or liberal, but just willing to do what needs to be done and ask questions that need to be asked on behalf of community. So we had this more seasoned planner that started on with the project with us. And then we ended up having he left and went to another job. And so we ended up getting a more younger white planner who just came into just adopted City of Oakland's traditional culture of planning, and kind of that's how he operated with us. And so, we're more on a participatory planning hype and just centering community and, not necessarily definitely not coming from where the city is coming from and just checking the boxes and worrying about the bottom line, the economic drive of things. And so just going through this process, we just had a lot of back and forth and not being aligned of how we saw things. And so myself in particular, in the group is kind of seen or known as more outspoken. And so I work with this planner a lot, this white young planner a lot, and just experienced a lot of just emotional that I feel paid and unaccounted through this process.
Keita, I'm sorry. I think we just lost your mic. And production, are we going to be able to get her back, or should we just put a pause on that and go to the next the next one? I was going to queue you up, Izzy, for the same question. Let's do that. Izzy, I think you've heard the question. Can you share that experience with us?
Yes, thank you. First, Anacita and everyone on the panel, I'm so honored to be on this panel with you. Other than Anacita, I've never met you. I want to thank also Department of Water Resources and Local Government Commission for this opportunity to talk about these critical issues. And this issue of a sow's ear into a silk purse, something we thought that was going to go wrong, but went right. I want to introduce briefly the Sierra Fund. We were created 20 years ago to try to begin to address the impacts of the gold rush. Most people here probably realize that the mining era was crazy destructive. It blew apart mountains looking for gold using power washing called hydraulic mining. They cut down almost every tree to timber the mines and build the towns of the Silver Strike on either side of the mountain range. The mountains blew so much apart that the rivers were running with hydraulic mining debris that filled up the bay, destroyed the estuary. But the worst destruction of that time was the impact on the human beings that had been tending this beautiful landscape for thousands of years, this beautiful landscape that my people came into and destroyed. The Sierra Fund works on building the ecosystem resiliency and the community resiliency where we live. And I want to talk today about an effort to restore community resiliency by working with tribal people, a project that I thought was going to go wrong, but it seems to have come out very right. I want to say from the beginning, we've always worked with tribal leadership in our programs as the leaders. We define our role as helping to what we call cut the red tape that my people have created around everything from insurance to managing grants to holding ceremony on public land. So the clear desire for recognition, for federal recognition, is an outstanding need that we are always trying to support the unrecognized tribes in our state on. But what we have more ability to work on is the second request we've heard from tribal leadership since we began working, which was the request to have land returned, their land returned to them. What could be more just? So 20 years ago, I was on the Board of Supervisors. I was part of a lawsuit against PG&E, and that lawsuit was trying to get PG&E to pay the money they owed to the state. Rather than doing that, PG&E and the legislature created a project to give away land as reparations, if you will, for what PG&E had done. So one of the areas of the state that had beautiful land coming back to it was up in the northern part of the Feather River, and that effort to bring that land back to that area was led by the Mountain Maidu. Beginning in 2006, that would be 14 years ago, the Sierra Fund began working with Mountain Maidu. We shared our documents and materials with their young leader who has sadly passed. They got their application into the process, 10 years of meetings, application changes, negotiations, and patience. My big concern in working with tribal people was that the PG&E process would be captured by state parks or federal government or big environmental organizations based in LA or San Francisco or New York, and that the land would have more absentee landowners instead of original people getting their hands on this land. So the Sierra Fund dedicated ourselves to working on this. It's a very long haul. Well, after all of these years, the Mountain Maidu Summit was given their land back in the Feather River, a watershed known as Tasman-Koyam. 15 years later, we're still there working with them. We support traditional ecological knowledge and Western ecological knowledge. We call it TEC and WEC in their project work. Just a couple of weeks ago, our staff were at Tasman-Koyam working with tribal youth and members to build the beaver dam analogs to help bring beaver back into the Valley, doing training on water quality monitoring equipment, hanging out with generations of Mountain Maidu. My staff reported one scene where tribal elders were standing on the side of the creek, heckling the youth to do it right. And this the sense of joy and accomplishment, something real out of something terrible. And so I really want to say that project was scary. We kept thinking it wasn't going to happen. We had another project for tribal people fall out of the process. But what we've learned is the first move in any region must be to locate and listen to the original people of the region and how to support their efforts if they ask for help. The wrong first move is to approach tribal people and ask them to endorse your grant proposal. A commitment to justice and perseverance of effort must be proven before tribal people can trust white people like me to support their efforts. As we just heard the chairman say, this is a one-time only opportunity through the door, an opportunity we never gave the original people of this area. It takes years to get important work done, and the only thing worth doing is this long-term important work, which is mostly about building personal relationships. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to tell that story. It's a story that goes on into the future. It's the first land Mountain Maidu Summit has owned since we came and stole everything 150 years ago.
Great. No, thank you, Izzy, for that. It's always great to hear you and your stories. I appreciate that. Kenyon, please let's go to you, and would love to hear an experience you can share about the amazing journey your family and your community have done over the years.
Mishmin Tuhis, Kanarkat Canyon, Coyote Woman, Sayers Roots, daughter of Tribal Chairwoman Anne Marie Sayers of Indian Canyon Mutsun Band. Currently with the Doktip Urwurm, I am a representative of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples in the 9 counties, northern counties. I want to voice that because I started a business around consultation, I am lucky and blessed to interact with many different agencies, small and large. And there was a little project in the East Bay Territory, and with every agreement that I get into, I always make sure that they have a live document to clarify that if the Indigenous peoples of the territory want anything changed, that they have the first voice, first priority. And I, as a California native, can offer insight on lived experiences and possible reasonable ways to navigate what does it mean to offer land acknowledgements, or what does it mean to consult with Indigenous peoples. However, the Native peoples have the right to decline and may not be interested, and the organization shouldn't just do the, well, we have them or we don't, or we reached out and they never got back to us. There are other things that the community can always do to raise awareness of honoring truth and history, learning about the history of the land that they are on. So I was lucky to work with a little watershed project, Rahim Creek, I think, and I initially saw the email and it felt as though they had a tiny bit of space on a page where they wanted to acknowledge the land relatively well to honor truth and history. And I was almost feeling as though, oh, it's a quick tokenistic one-off where there's already a preset amount of space, there's a quick timeline, there's a tiny budget, and I want people to learn truth and history, so I don't immediately like turn away. And what came of it was something really, really beautiful. It was that one of their representatives didn't speak for their group because we then had a second meeting. However, it turned into more than what I initially thought was available. And it was that they really do want to be advocates for truth and history. That, one, we acknowledge the Indigenous groups of the territory, because in the East Bay, there are 3 large active groups: Himrin, the Confederated Villages of Lashawn, and the Muwekma tribe, who are all doing amazing work around language revitalization, cultural revitalization, stewardship of their lands, and protecting sacred sites on an ongoing basis, with support or not. And so for their community, this organization that hired my consultation services, for them to want to be advocates or claim that they are in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, I was really happy to witness that they were ready and willing to have that live document. They were ready and willing to even leverage their audience on their websites to have an interactive page to have links because it was going to be a produced book, so having URLs in a book is not always that grand. But on their website, having live links to the Indigenous peoples groups and active issues that are going on an ongoing basis, ready and willing to leverage their audience to point out, or if the Native groups of the territory wanted to highlight projects, that would be given immediate precedence, and even a willingness to do a research project to highlight elders of the community, to interview Ruth Orta and talk about acorns and traditional ecological knowledge and watershed stewardship. It was really wonderful to witness an organization that didn't know what it didn't know and take steps to open up and leverage. What does it really mean to acknowledge the land? What does it really mean to acknowledge that we are benefiting day after day after day on stolen land, and we're taking these steps? So honoring truth and history is a great way, and I'm really lucky to be part of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Canyon. I mean, I'd like to repeat what you said about honoring truth and history. Chairman Lopez, before I do that, I wanted to say I think we've lost Izzy's feed, and so we're working on that. And so we'll
No, I'm here.
Yes, are you, Izzy, on phone?
No, I can see you, and I can see
okay,
myself
great.
because I'm in the show.
Oh yeah, that's Izzy. Kita's feed. I'm sorry.
That's right, Kita.
And so if we get her back, we'll let her finish her comments to the first question. But Chairman Lopez, I'd like to ask you the next question. And the next question is, can you describe your perspective on how public agencies' tribal engagement has changed during your current leadership, and how your tribe's interaction has changed with state and local agencies?
Well, one thing that's changed is that a lot of, the governor came out and said all departments must have a consultation policy as an example. And some departments take that serious. They want to do, they want to seriously consult and understand the interests and the desires of tribes. But others, they just see that as a check the box and move on. And it's not only between departments, but it can be between employees within that department. If you're talking to one employee, to one particular employee, that person will tell you, will work with you and try to help you. Whereas others, again, they don't have patience and no interest. The other thing that's, and then the other thing is that those those consultation policies, and this we've talked about this. A number of us have talked about this. Those consultation policies say nothing about recognizing our truth and our history and the impact of that history on our people and our culture and our spirituality. I mean, those things are ignored and erased by the state of California. A lot of people think that the tribes are nothing more than myths and folklore, and that's very troubling. But if states can learn how to can talk to us in a sincere way and truly try to help us do serious consultation and work with us to protect our cultural resources, our sacred sites, our cultural sites, etc. That's what we need, and that's what we would like to have. But for now, they have a very thin area that they can consult with us on. For example, whenever they come out with a draft, with an EIR, a draft environmental impact report, for a state project, such as the high-speed rail, they just want, they have that whole system. They know exactly what they want to do, and they're not going to be deterred. And that's what we're dealing with. We've been trying to consult with high-speed rail since 2004. And they're still telling the same story and putting the same alignment and the same construction that they were from the very beginning. And we feel like, you know, many different kinds of consultation has you know, has not made an impact at all. But then other state agencies, I mean, I know we worked with the Department of Energy one time on a project. They're calling me after hours because I'm very busy. They're calling me after hours or scheduling appointments, and if I needed to cancel it and reschedule, they were fine with that. And that, you know, and they were truly, I felt that they were truly interested in reaching out to us, and that was really welcoming to see. You know, and then, you know, I said we did a lot of research in our tribe, and one area that we've done a lot of research at is how our ancestors stewarded and took care of Mother Earth. And what we're learning is that the way we took care of it is going to be very important for surviving and dealing with climate change. You know, our native plants, they develop deep root systems. They'll go down 15 and 20 feet. Well, that type of root system is very resistant to drought, to fire, and to flooding. And so, you know, and also whenever the mudslides and stuff like that, those deep root systems will hold the soil together. So there's a lot of benefits to restoring our native plants. Currently, in the state of California, only 4% of all landscapes in California. You drive along any freeway and you look at the grasses and stuff like that. That's all 96% invasive, and that's just a horrible thing. So, and now that we're talking about climate change and we have that research behind us, people are starting to believe us because we have the research backing us. A good example of that is fire and doing traditional and cultural burns. Whenever we talked about it, nobody listened to us. But whenever we talk about, traditional uses of fire and stuff like that now, because the science has verified it or proved it, now they'll believe that our ancestors did, you know, regularly burn landscapes, and that helped control the catastrophic buildup of grasses, and it was also helped maintain, for example, the central coast of California was a coastal prairie, and that was one of the most biodiverse landscapes in Northern California. Well, whenever they outlawed fire, and all three periods of colonization outlawed fire, you know, in came the shrubs and then in came the trees, and that coastal prairie and the biodiversity is lost now. You know, and we're working hard to try and find ways to restore that central coast so that we can restore that biodiversity and also provide our food plants. You know, a lot of the plants that we were maintaining at that time and those grasses and stuff like that, those were our foods, our medicines, our basketry, and a lot of other purposes. So we're working hard to do that. And now, you know, people are starting to listen and wanting to work with our tribe. And we say if we're going to survive and if we're going to deal with climate change, it must be indigenous led. And we truly and totally believe that. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much, Anacita.
Anacita, you are muted. If you want to just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, so much. And really appreciate what you said about that participation. I think that's really important. And so, and what a story about how perspectives have changed throughout the years. And you know, a lot of great leadership under yourself and your many tribal members who worked very long and hard. Canyon, I'd like to have you also address that same question, and if you could tell us a little bit about how things have changed under your current leadership with state and local agencies in that participation process.
I want to acknowledge that my mother, Anne Marie Sayers, has been monitoring and protecting sacred sites since the early 80s, and she's watched a lot, and a lot has evolved. And now, as I step into continuing her legacy in both stewarding our homelands as well as going out and recognizing that, well, our ancestral remains, our cultural resources need to be respected and considered in various projects, that we need cultural sensitivity training. We need cultural competency training between Indigenous peoples and these agencies, because many times the parameters are of these agencies and it's a one-sided view, and it's a demand that Indigenous peoples have to meet their criterion. You have so many days to respond. If you don't, you're not part of the process. Oh, you were either here or you're not, and you may have made comments or you didn't, versus actual real relationship building, actual considerations of acknowledging, say, like CEQA, California Environmental Qualities Act, or NAGPRA. That being said, when it comes to like considering honoring truth and history and the steps that I've seen, well, I'm feeling blessed that I didn't have to be in the environment my mother did, with the various agencies like archaeological firms wanting to dig and study and study and dig, and then construction workers who want to press on through the timeline, and the Indigenous community who are, well, sometimes only invited as a matter of circumstance to follow rules to watch our ancestral sacred spaces be desecrated. Now I'm really happy to witness archaeological firms really prioritizing the Indigenous voice in clarifying that it's not good to engage in destructive analysis. We can be proactive and collaborate together. And it's really important that if we talk about what collaborative efforts are these organizations and institutions partnering with Indigenous peoples of the territory? Many times we're on the very bottom, like you made your project, you have your budget, you're doing all these things, you're getting your permits, and then you barely acknowledge an environmental impact report or the considerations of abiding by CEQA regulation. And then they reach out to the people saying, oh, by the way, Native people, are you okay with this happening here and devastating this area? Versus, let's go all the way to the top. Have you interacted with or have a collaboration with Indigenous peoples? And are you taking steps to consider what the needs of the community are? What does it mean to impact their cultural resources? What does it mean to impact their territory? And then possibly get a chance to solve whatever issues that they're engaging in their project with. Because so many times everyone else is on corporate time, corporate dime. The Native people are always the last to be considered. Yet, when we think about it, Indigenous peoples make up less than 5% of the world's population. Yet we attempt to protect over 85% of the world's biodiversity with limited to no resources. And we still do, because we recognize that this is our obligation. This is our sacred responsibility. By honoring our ancestors, by honoring our elders, by attempting to be good ancestors in training, we continue on. Yet a lot of these agencies, they may not be as proactive because they wait to be on their time. They set down a project at the end of the business day and then pick it the next day. Native peoples, we're answering calls, we're answering letters with no capacity or infrastructure because this matters to us. It's our obligation. It's not the Western colonial construct of being entitled or to enterprise or to capitalize off of these cultural resources. So I recognize how lucky I am to be here. And my mother says it's the best time. Today is the best day and the best time to be an Indigenous person since contact. And I will too follow her quote to say that day in and day out, because each day is a bit better.
Well, thank you for sharing good words from your mother. She's such an honored elder and such a strong leader. And it's my interactions with her have been just so memorable and inspiring. So you've got the best teacher Very fortunate. Thank you for that. Izzy, well, I'd like to ask you the next question. Could you share whether, from your perspective, how state or local agencies have gotten community engagement right? And a follow-up to that is, if you could change an existing state policy that has negatively affected or impacted community or tribal inclusion, what would you change? Giving you all the power in the world in the state of California. Executive privilege.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate hearing the youthful voice of Canyon. I think I'm an ancestor in training that's a little closer to that ancestor part. And over my 40 years in this movement, I've been involved in lots of processes which have often gone terribly. I spent the first 20 years working with the farm worker movement and the last 20 years working on the impacts of mining in the Sierra. And much of that's been pretty awful. But I do want to say a good thing and a bad thing. I participated in the lobbying effort that ended up resulting in Prop 1 and the Disadvantaged and Community and Tribal Needs Assessment Program. I was at years of meetings and demanding, trying to get this concept into people's heads. When it came out, of course, nothing is as one would hope it would be. It's all very difficult to implement such a neat idea. How do we go out and listen to the community and find out what their needs are actually prior to, it's a crazy idea, prior to trying to meet those needs. Let's go assess. I know, Canyon is like, geez. So we were eager, and the Sierra Fund joined what was called then the Mountain County Funding Area as the representative from CABI, but we weren't the only. When they started this process up where we live, the Mountain County Funding Area gave us an opportunity to send representatives to this coordinating committee, and the Consensus American Bear Yuba CABI, Integrated Regional Water Management Group, said, we want to be represented by a tribal person. So we sent Shelley Covert, who's Nisenan Foothills. I literally drove with her because, of course, there was no stipends to participate in these things. Lucky if you get a bad sandwich, you know. So we would go to these meetings together. Shelley would speak. And there was another piece of it. Wasn't only the underrepresented or underestimated communities of the tribal people, but also the Latino, the poor people that live up in the Sierra. To address those needs, we hired a Spanish-speaking community organizer with EJ background, and he started to go talk to people where we live about water quality and water access. And I'm in the Sierra. We have fabulous water still. There's problems up here, but that's not our problem. What everybody wanted to talk about, guess what? It was about burning to death. It was about fire. It was about the air quality being horrible. It was about low-income people not having access to resources, not even the fire-safe resources being in Spanish. There's not a lot of Spanish speakers in the Sierra, but there are a lot of folks that do live up there that don't speak only English. And so there was a huge gap in that understanding. But I want to tell a little story about bringing Shelley Covert to the Mountain County Funding Area. Our area was given only $13 million for the whole Sierra Nevada, so much less than even Pitt or Inyo, and way less than the coasts. And so we had very little money and a lot of area to the headwaters of the state of California to cover. And at the first meeting, Shelley Covert came into this meeting with a bunch of all other white people. Everyone else is there, water agencies. They were all getting paid their government dime on their government time, right? And one of the guys says to Shelley says, we need to have our own tribal outreach program. It has to be only us running that program. And one of the water agency guys, a fellow from the Tuolumne Stanislaus, said, why? Now he didn't go like, why? Or like, eh. He asked a genuine question, and Shelley took the time to give a genuine answer. And after, it was like magic. It was like the room began to change as all of them heard what she had to say. And after she was done, people said, okay. No fighting, no disagreement, no insistent that we have the well, if we're going to do that, we need to have the Italian outreach. I mean, it was none of that baloney. So I think that was extremely exciting. It was pretty historic. Shelley and I sang in the car all the way home. But that wasn't enough. There's a lot of drawbacks. The lack of long-term funding is the whole problem. The lack of general support funding is the whole problem. You start these relationships and then they dissolve. We started off our CABI, Integrated Regional Water Management Group, being able to pay for tribal participation, a stipend. It's like, try to get an attorney to come to your meeting for, for mileage and a bad sandwich. They're not going to come. And they're less valuable. They're less rare than tribal spokespeople. So not enough money, not enough understanding of how to invest the money, too much people wanting to do the thing where they rush in and thank God they figured out your problem, tribal people, and you just need to endorse their program. And they'll give you $50 to come to the meeting. There's just so much wrong thinking about how you do this. There needs to be long-term investment in relationship building. A good thing on the horizon, the State Water Resources Control Board seems to understand that water rights are not some fake thing that only belong to big cities. That tribal water rights are durable and powerful. And thank God they're finally getting there. So there's some news on the horizon that gets better, but I think that the IRWAMs are now going away. They're not even we spent 15 years building these relationships where we can have that conversation I just reported, and now all the money's gone.
Just like that.
It's not all about money. It isn't all about money.
No.
But nobody is expected to do this work for free except folks like the indigenous people that are probably on this line right here. And it's just an outrage. The Sierra Fund has done a lot of work where we live to pay people and bring things, to listen to what they want and not disagree with them or muddle with it, or try to pick our beak, put our nose into the money that's going to them. There's all of these bad things that I see happening when people try to work with tribes. That is very, it's the culture, our white culture, our capitalist culture keeps coming in. So I really want to thank the chairman and the young Canyon for helping me to hear and learn more from you.
That's great, Izzy. Really appreciate that, and especially that perspective. I think I'd like to. There's a chat question that's come in from the chat, and it's actually a complicated question. So I'm gonna, and it has to do with the question is there a utility in using Western science to quantify TEK that tribes have known and worked for thousands of years, if for no other reason than to co-create a common body of knowledge, linking Western science and traditional ecological knowledge? And then it goes on to say that the question goes on to say, or does the persistent need to quantify simply serve to continue, replicate, and validate colonial value systems? Very complicated question. It could be a panel discussion for days. But I'd like to just ask, Chairman and Canyon, if you could talk a little bit about TEK, because I mean, we look at that and it's a little bit like what you mentioned, Canyon, your perspective earlier about land acknowledgement. Are they just going through a process or emotion? And now we're seeing TEK being adopted. I'd like to, talk to you as subject matter experts. Can you let's have you the last few minutes just talk about TEK. And Canyon, would you like to go first, and then Chairman?
Yeah, traditional ecological knowledge sharing is so very important, from as simple as storytelling, but also listening to the land. My mother taught me that if I'm going to benefit off of anything, if I'm going to eat, if I'm going to sustain myself, I would need to do it in the right way. And that is offer a gift or recognize the life that's lived and the gift that's given. So my mother taught me to offer a pinch of tobacco or a song or even a strand of my hair to the plants. And I recognize where it comes from. So bringing that into our procedures and practices, recognizing how much we impact the world around us. Where did that fruit come from? Where do these resources come from that we're benefiting off of day in and day out because we need to eat and we need to drink? Are we accounting for where this comes from? From as simple as, I really wish garbage agencies would leave their waste so the community has to learn how to manage its mess. because this out of sight, out of mind idea is creating more complacent, entitled people who just want to consume, consume, consume and think it's not my problem, I don't need to see it. A lot of indigenous teachings that I have been brought up in around traditional ecological knowledge has taught me how to be responsible and attempt to be considerate of all living systems. How do my actions and my words impact not only myself, my family, the community, the environment, but the next 7 generations? How are the decisions being made going forward? Consider that. And so, the book, Tending the Wild, written by Kat Anderson, she got so much flack for being a woman in science, in STEM research, as well as so much of the Western colonial construct, especially around academia and around research, break apart, put together, barely ever acknowledges holistic systems, let alone qualitative data. If any of you have a chance to look up suddenoaklife.org, I really appreciate the research that these community members are doing. They're non-Indigenous, however, they found archival record talking about how the Spaniards wrote in their journals that some areas were burned and how they would have to prepare by bringing wood. And I'm sitting here like, oh, so the colonizers' Western lens was quite limited in archiving and validating and cataloging and creating a written historical record of how much Indigenous peoples were truly the first ecologists, the first environmentalists, the first land managers, the first doctors, and how the colonial narrative is constantly perpetuating this construct of Native American hunter-gatherer and dismissing traditional ecological knowledge and the wisdom of our ancestors. If we didn't have batteries, generators, technology today, could you last 5 days without benefiting from all of the systems that we are not even contemplating or being appreciative of? We're just taking advantage of. What does it mean to allow our decisions and our actions to consider that impact? And what does it mean to be a part of that system versus something or someone that's entitled to and just benefits off of? And so I try and bring these perspectives into conversations everywhere I go, because I really do believe that we can strategize sustainable futures leaning to Indigenous pedagogy's teachings. But that always needs to remain. We need to also acknowledge Indigenous protocol. Who are people of these lands that we benefit off of, and are they part of the conversation? Nothing about us without us. If people want to lean to Indigenous wisdoms, they best be sure Native peoples are part of the conversation. They can't just cherry pick an enterprise off of it. So traditional ecological knowledge is just one step, and breaking down these systems that have been silencing marginalized community voices, like, we need to shift that. So
No,
I'm
thank you.
lucky.
Yes, absolutely. And we're all lucky to have those words shared with us. Thank you very much, Canyon. I'm going to go to Chairman Lopez, and there's another great question via the chat from our audience. And I'm going to read the question, Chairman. It's, how can white people be better allies with tribal communities to uplift TEK without perpetuating intellectual property right infringements? And we've got about, 5 minutes remaining for you to answer that question. I think it's a very good question from our audience. And I think that really cuts to what Canyon mentioned about TEK, because it's a fine line of intellectual property infringement and what we know historically, with the use of speaking to our elders in the past, and then someone prophetizing from that. And I think we've come a long way from that, but we have to always be prepared from lessons learned. So, Chairman, the question is, how can white people be better allies with tribal communities to uplift TEK without perpetuating intellectual property right infringements?
Well, thank you very much for that question, whoever sent it in. That is an important question. I'm going to start to answer that question by just telling you our creation story and the impacts that had. Our creation story tells us the Creator very specifically picked our people to live on these territories and to take care of Mother Earth and all living things. And for us, all living things are the people, the wildlife, the plants, the oceans, the rivers, the air, the moon, the stars, etc. They are all living, and they're sacred. They have the same mother, excuse me, the same father we do, Father Sky, and they say have the same mother we do, that we have, Mother Earth. They're all sacred. And so with that directive from Creator, that sacred covenant that Creator gave us to take care of Mother Earth and all living things, our people took that responsibility very serious. Very serious. Our people were not hunters and gatherers. They worked hard to fulfill that obligation to Creator. And they did that for 10, 12, 15, perhaps 20,000 years or more. And if you think of that in terms of generations, that could be 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 generations or more that our people have been on this earth. And like today, they want the next generation to know more than what they knew. It's important that they pass on the critical knowledge. And that critical knowledge for us is how to take care of Mother Earth, how to take care of the bears when they do not migrate in our territory, how to keep the rivers clean, how to have ceremony for the salmon, how to have ceremony for the migrating geese, etc. Those are all very important things that our ancestors learned over that period of time. And they learned, first and foremost, that Mother Earth is sacred. And it was our responsibility to maintain that sacredness for Mother Earth. Where is that sacredness today? Where is that sacredness today? People have just monetized Mother Earth and look to make, look how they can make money out of mining and taking the water and polluting the air. There's a lot of money being made in those activities. But how is that maintaining the sacredness of Mother Earth? And those are things that are important. If people are going to learn TEK, it's not just, how do I take care of this medicine plant? Or how do I, how can I, what can I do? And they just want to look at the physical act of taking care of it. That spiritual component is at the heart of everything we do and all that learning. And that is the most important. That is the absolute most important. And so all of our restoration efforts began with restoring the spirituality of Mother Earth. And that is so important to learn. And you don't have to learn our prayers. You don't have to learn our songs and our ceremonies. What's important is that you open your heart and you look to take care of the four-legged, the winged, the finned, to take care of the water and live your life in a way that is respecting Mother Earth, and pray and have a relationship. That whole relationship is so important. You need to have a relationship with the four-legged and the finned, etc. You got to pray for them. You got to treat them with kindness. You have to listen to them, and you have to have a great patience with them. And they will talk to you, and they will tell you what they need. And that's what our ancestors had. They had that ability, and over time, they earned that ability over time to listen to the plants and to learn what was needed. And that's what we do today. That's what we do today. And all our people are working to learn that and to develop those relationships. They are so important. And so those are the important things. Now, I'll just say a couple things about the traditional ecological knowledge and the way most people think about it. A couple really important things is the way that people, is the plants. Every plant, every native plant, I'll say it that way, every native plant has a responsibility to take care of a community. And that community includes the fungi, the insects, the birds, the four-legged, and people as well. I mean, when you drive by and you see these fields and fields and fields of strawberries, or orchards, miles and miles and miles of almond orchards, for example. I mean, how is that taking care of the fungi? There's a fungi there, they're going to spray the hell out of it. If there's weeds there, they're going to put a herbicide there. If there's if insects are getting in there, they're going to spray the heck out of those insects. If deers get into there, they're going to put up these blast charges to scare the four-legged away, or they're going to fence it off to keep them out. I mean, that's not taking care of Mother Earth. The way we are doing things now is not taking care of Mother Earth. With our land trust, we truly believe that a lot of people in the environmental movement, they have good hearts and they want to do the good thing. In the same way there's a lot of people out there with good hearts and they want to do the good thing, but they just don't know what the heck they're doing. They call stewardship acquiring land and putting a trail on there and putting up a sign that says "Be home by dark," and they call that stewardship. Where are those relationships? How are they taking care of the birds and the four-legged? That's what stewardship is. And where's the prayers? That's what stewardship is. So you want to learn TEK, it's more than just learning what this plant is or what that plant is, or is that okay if I eat this plant? Will this sustain me when I'm in the back hills? It's so much more than that. And I can go on for quite a long time, Anacita, but I know you don't want me to do it.
And we could continue to listen, because I do want to say, the messaging, and Izzy, I'm sorry we don't have a more time to get your comments on this topic. I know you'd have a lot to share there through your experiences, and Canyon, you as well. I really think that, having you share what you both shared on TEK, I love that, Canyon, is something. And I really want to say that what we've done right now, hearing the stories from tribal elders and tribal subject matter expert, we're experiencing that right now through oral tradition. And I really wanted to close our panel with saying that this has been a wonderful experience to hear this. And thank you, Chairman, for sharing that creation story. I mean, there's nothing more sacred than to have that knowledge pass. And I really think that, we were blessed to have you on this. And so I really want to say thanks to everyone. Kita, I'm sorry that we lost you. I don't know if you're able to hear us or not. We'll look forward to hearing more from you in the future. And I want to thank my panels. And I think at this point, we'll turn this over back to our production crew. But thanks, everyone. And Emily, it's back to you.